best practice webinars by the TIDE task force. So TIDE stands for Tackling Inclusion and Diversity within the Energy Sector. So I will put some links in later on to our LinkedIn pages and conference details. But as I said, really excited to be part of this first webinar on building an EDI strategy and roadmaps for action. Just a bit of housekeeping. We're using Teams, as you can see, so please mute your microphones. You're welcome to keep your camera on, but please note that this session will be recorded, so you may appear. There is a Q&A function. There's a button at the top where you can ask questions as we go, but there will be a dedicated bit of time at the end for Q&As with the panel. So just as a courtesy, if you could keep your microphone muted, and we will make this recording available after the session. So I'm going to start with introducing the panel. So I'm Lesley Babb. My day job is head of EDI in Ofgem, and I've been there about a year. In terms of a visual description, I have short dark hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a red top, and I am white, middle-aged woman. My pronouns are she and her. And in terms of what diversity means to me is I believe passionately, not just in the workplace, but everyone should have the ability to be themselves and bring their whole selves to the workplace. So some of my hidden diversity is that I have a mental health condition, so I have a hidden disability, which wouldn't necessarily be visible to others. So I'm keen to make sure workplaces are inclusive to all and can allow everyone to thrive as I have. I'm going to hand over now to Inge Woudstra to introduce herself.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Lesley. Inge Woudstra. I am a diversity and inclusion consultant at Voice at the Table, or one of their principal diversity and inclusion consultants. I've been working in this area for the last 12 years, initially in gender diversity, and then I moved the last 3 years to wider inclusion and diversity. A lot of work I do at the moment is with leadership teams, helping exec teams and leadership teams understand what it is to be inclusive and why it might be so important for their company. And then I also have a specialization in systems and processes. How can we make sure we de-bias our recruitment? How do we make sure we de-bias our progression? I typically work in the energy industry, engineering industry, and with tech companies. Doing a large project in the data infrastructure industry at the moment, for instance. And as to diversity, you did that lovely, Lesley. So yeah, description of me: white, middle-aged woman, blue top, red necklace, blonde hair. I'm originally from the Netherlands, have been in the UK for the last 18 years, so bring a bit of diversity from, yeah, international European perspective. And yeah, hoping to really help you today with understanding a bit more of how you can actually move diversity and inclusion forward in your organisation.
Thanks, Inge. Great to have you on board. And last but certainly not least, Jason.
Hello, everybody. So yeah, my name's Jason. I'm the talent and inclusion lead at So Energy. We're a 100% renewable domestic energy supplier with about 400 So Energists now. Just a bit of a visual description of myself. So I'm a white middle-aged male, short hair in a blue jumper, and my pronouns are he, him. My journey here has been an eclectic one. So at school, I really struggled with dyslexia, and despite being picked up really early and having a lot of extra support, I always found reading and writing really challenging. Thankfully, my dyslexia gave me a couple of superpowers that I would put to good use in my first career in performing arts, but sadly that career ended a little short due to an injury. So I finished performing back in my early 20s. And I moved into the world of talent, where I've been for the last sort of nearly a decade. And I was hit by this really stark reality that not all work have the same level of diversity or sense of belonging that we had in the performing arts world. my dyslexia was very much on display when I moved into this space, and I felt kind of the need to hide it. And it wasn't about 5 years in, I decided to make it my mission to combat that and ensure that people could enjoy the same level of belonging in any career that they have. And I made it a part of my role ever since. I look forward to talking through some practical bits of work we've done at So Energy, and I've done in other businesses before, to get you started on your ED&I journey. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jason. And Jason is also on the Tide task force with me as well. So it's lovely to have a colleague on board as well. I think if we can skip through the next few slides, because they're a bit more information around our biographies. But I think actually, you know, I think we've all sort of given a good account of ourselves here, and they're obviously there when we share the recording for people to reference. So in terms of an outline of the session, today we really want to give you some different frameworks that you can use to develop your EDI strategy and get started on if you're new or you're very early on in your EDI strategy. But hopefully some of the case studies that we will give you will show that it doesn't matter where you are on your journey. There may be some practical things that you can take away from this session that actually are proven to work. And obviously we've got case studies from Ofgem as the regulator, but also from Jason in So Energy as a small and medium-sized enterprise. So I'm going to hand over to you, Inge, to talk through some of the frameworks. You're on mute, Inge, sorry.
Yeah, great. Oh, well, thank you, Lesley. Yeah, when we start working with organizations, we start by looking where they are on the diversity journey. And that's actually super important, because depending on where you are in the journey, you need to start at with a different step. So I can't just tell you this is where you start, because you first need to know where you currently are on that journey. So I'd just like to take you through that journey in a few minutes to help you assess where you are. And then we'll do a poll after that so you can answer. So you need to pay attention, because you do have to assess where you are, which I'm sure you'll be doing automatically anyway. So the first step, and I don't think many of you are in there, but who knows, because, is that organizations, the first stage is where they really don't get it. So that means you may be here, but actually your leadership don't get it in your organization. This is not really high on the agenda. How can you tell if your organization is there? Well, typically you'd see a white all-male board. You look at the website and there's not a lot of visible diversity on the website. You try and find a diversity and inclusion policy or ambition or statement on the website, and you probably can't find much. Might also be that occasionally sometimes there's a public statement from one of your C-suite or leaders, or C-suite representatives, your leaders, where you can really tell it lacks an understanding of diversity and inclusion. Then more organizations might be here, stage 2, where here it's all about window dressing. There's a real understanding, there's something on the website of diversity and inclusion, but it's being done for the outside world. We need to look to be good. We need to look to be good to our investors, or we need to look to be good because our employees ask this, but you see that it's not really believed in these organizations. So how do you know your organization is here? Well, telltale signs are there is, for instance, an employee resource group, a networking group, but they don't get the budget, or they don't get many people to come. There is some talk of diversity and inclusion, but then when you look at the teams that get the projects on their website, or the high-profile projects, you don't see any diversity in there. So there is talk, but you don't see any genuine action. Stage 3 is very much the let's fix it. Okay, we have a problem. We need to do something about this. We need to focus on equality. We need to eradicate race. We need to be good people. There's talk, some political talk that can be in your organization. There's a desire to right some wrongs. Not necessarily wrong, but you're not quite there yet. What you see is that initiatives in this stage are focused on specific target groups. Let's fix the women. Let's give them some career guidance. Let's give some mentoring to ethnic minority people. Then the next stage, you start to see what the difference is with the let's fix it stage, is where diversity is seen as an opportunity. It's no longer box ticking, window dressing. this is a real opportunity. There's a real realization that if you're not diverse and inclusive, you're not going to survive as a business. This is going to help you be a successful business. And I'm not sure how many organizations are there already in this group, but have a think for yourself. Is that how you can tell is, do you talk about ED&I values? Do those values link to your mission statement? So instead of we believe in diversity because it's a great thing, it says something like we believe delivering energy to everyone. Therefore, we need to have a diverse workforce that is representative and that we include in our decisions. So there is a real link to that business mission. That's often when we start working with organizations, because that's when they start investing and when we start working with the leadership teams. So once it's seen as an opportunity and there's a clear D&I ambition, then the organizations are in the next step, are really building the foundation. And building the foundation is about where leaders are learning to be inclusive leaders. They learn about their own unconscious bias. You see leaders that are quite humble, they understand they have a privilege, that are looking for information, that are really going on their own journey to become those role models for inclusion and shape the culture of the organization. The next step is then to the stage 6 is the growing and nurturing phase, where this is rolled out in the rest of the organization. So it's not just only the leadership becoming inclusive, it is also the people becoming inclusive, the senior leaders being trained on unconscious bias and inclusive behaviors. You're starting to look at changing your processes and models, looking at, is our recruitment, does it have bias? Does our progression have bias? And as you can probably hear when I'm talking about this, you may think, well, we are looking at our recruitment, but we're still in the let's fix it phase. So yeah, that happens, right? A lot of initiatives, especially in those first 3 stages, initiatives can just happen, but they may not be the right ones, and they're not necessarily going to be very effective. Because let's say you're changing your recruitment, but you're not inclusive, your leaders aren't inclusive, your diverse people are quickly going to, that you have hired, people from underrepresented groups are quickly going to leave again. Or you have all these really inclusive recruitment processes, but managers will just find ways to get the people in that they like and that they feel comfortable with anyway. So you can do that. It could well be that you're doing some of those initiatives that fit in the later stages, but they're probably not going to be very successful. And then the last stage, and there's only a few organizations there really, and they're still learning, that's those immersed and fully benefiting. They're constantly learning and updating their inclusion. They spot bias in their systems. They keep looking for bias. They keep learning about diversity and inclusion and unconscious bias. And if you look at their organization, you do see a wide diversity of people at all levels in the organization. Now, there's absolutely no shame or blame, because we're all on this journey, and sometimes we sort of also go a bit back and forth. Sometimes I'm still in the let's fix it phase, and I have to remind myself, no, it's about this business. So as a person, you also go through the different stages, and it's very important to recognize where you are and to be quite aware of where you are. It's a bit like, when you can't face you need to diet, then you're not going to be very successful in dieting or sport. You can't admit to yourself that you're actually not doing enough on sport. You're not going to be successful in actually changing your lifestyle. So it is very important to realize as an organization where you are, so you can choose the right steps. So let's have a look where you are. I'd love to hear. How many people have we got on the call? Let's see. Can we throw up our poll and see where we are? 43 people on the call and a number of 6 presenters. So I'd love to hear where you are, where you think your organization is, the organization that you work in. And if you're a consultant, you might just want to put in where the organization, your key client, which stage they're at. That would also be interesting.
Yeah, so just the polls just popped up now, but I'm going to read the questions out just to help. At what D&I maturity level would you place your organisation? And that is stage 1, don't get it, no EDI initiatives and no recognition of the benefits. Stage 2, that window dressing, so understanding the need to value EDI, but it's a bit of a tick box exercise. Stage 3, let's fix it. Lack of diversity is seen as a problem, but often volunteer-led. Stage 4, EDI is an opportunity, so the strategic value can be seen and the senior team is involved. Stage 5, building the foundation. So that's where your D&I and ambition and commitments are stated, and initiatives are around culture and systems, and you're measuring progress. Stage 6, growing and nurturing. So you've rolled out to senior leaders and people and you're integrating it as part of your cultural DNA. And then stage 7 is fully benefiting. So you're an industry leader on EDI and continuously setting the standard for others to follow. So if you can vote now, and we'll have a little look at the poll.
Oh, super interesting, right? So we have quite a few of you, stage 4 and 5, where EDI is really seen as an opportunity, and it's interesting, or where you already your leaders are involved and really starting to learn about inclusive leadership, your most senior leaders. So that's really interesting. And even some organizations in stage 6 where the senior leaders get it, and there's now this big rollout and you're sort of starting to change your systems. Then some of you in stage 2 and 3 as well, still sort of really starting. So yeah, great, good spread, and no one in stage 1 because you wouldn't be here on this call potentially if your organization is there. So let's have a look at what you need to do then. Do you want to do my next slide? So what we do, can I have my next slide, Sarah? Yeah. Next one. So what we do then, once we know where the organization is, we look at, well, what steps do they need to take? And there's the steps that are possible are sort of all in here. They are in the EDI model that we use, and we sort of choose which step is the best thing to do with an organization. Where we typically start is set the EDI ambition, which means why is it so important to us and how does it help us achieve our business aims? We do that with ideally you do that with a top team. If you do that, sometimes HR or a D&I committee sets it, which is just less effective. Ideally, you want to do this with your top team. What do we want to achieve? Make sure that's sort of the next one. Make sure the right stakeholders are involved. If you already have employee resource groups, you want to make sure you involve them. Make sure the right senior leaders are involved in this process. Communicators in the middle. Because if you're not really if you're in that stage 2 or 3, you need to start with communicating. You need to build the awareness with that senior leaders and get them on board. And it's in the middle because actually each stage you need to communicate. As soon as you have your ED&I ambition, you start communicating. When you know where you want to go, you need an action plan. Where are we now? And what do we need to do? Where are we going to focus? So that's the next step. Where are we now is very much about data now, and that will help you choose your priorities. There's so many things you can do, but depending on where you are now and where you want to get, what is your biggest issue now? That is where the data helps you. Now, a lot of organizations, especially smaller ones, get really bogged down in gathering all the diversity data they can think of. It's not very helpful. When you're gathering data, you just need just the data that will help you for your next step. A lot of organizations we work with, some large global ones, they have like a target, like 30% women on senior positions or 40% women on senior positions in 5 years. Right, let's start there. Let's just focus on that and start doing that. That is a clear focus, and then you can move forward. And they can already tell day 1, we can tell they don't have it. So they don't even need to gather any data before starting because they can tell they haven't got it. And then once you've got your plan, step 1 could be gather some more data. How are we going to define what a senior woman is, what a leadership position is, which grades are part of that leadership position? Where is this data collected in the Middle East? Where is this data collected in France? So you can then get some more information in place. But maybe you don't have a target on ethnic minorities. So then you also don't have to start collecting those data yet. Or maybe you can already tell you're just not very inclusive. So this is the qualitative part, and that's where we like to start. Build that inclusive organization so any people that come in feel included from the start. So that you find out by doing more quantitative surveys, doing engagement surveys, focus groups. So typically when we start with an organization, and I recommend that's where we do a quick survey with women or senior women in the organization, just asking them 5 questions about inclusion and trying to get examples from them on how included they feel. That gives a first flavor of how inclusive your organization is, which is great information you can use to get your leaders on board who often think, yeah, but we are very inclusive. And then the results of those surveys typically are quite shocking, I'm afraid. So then that then gives that real impetus that, okay, we're not as inclusive as we think. We have the ambition to be inclusive, we're not there yet. Let's start moving forward. And it's women is easy to gather that information, and it's a great weather vane for any other inclusion. So if you know women aren't included, probably disabled people aren't going to feel included either. Probably people with different religions, different sexual preferences aren't going to be feeling included either. Ethnic minorities aren't going to feel included. So it's a bit of a weather vane, and it's very quick and easy to gather to get you through that first steps. When you've got your data and action plan, you can set your initiatives, and I'll say more about that in the next slide. You need to have a governance structure in place, and you need to measure, who's going to do it. You want to make sure your senior leaders are involved in your D&I committee or your D&I task force. Make sure HR is involved, even if they're not keen. Sometimes they're not keen because it's just more work and they are already really overworked. But yeah, then make sure it doesn't create more work from them and there is some other resources to do the work. And then, of course, you need to measure so you can improve, but also so you can report and start communicating. So then the last slide, what kind of initiatives are you going to put in place? Now, people get super overwhelmed. We'll go to my initiatives. Yeah, because there are so many initiatives. So what we've done is just, you don't have to get all of these. The key bit is here is a structure of what initiatives you need to have in place. One, you need to start with initiatives on inclusive culture and leadership, the bias training, the inclusive leadership training, team level inclusion, understanding inclusive behaviors. Next is get your infrastructure in place, the policies, your that sort of make sure your bottom line is all right. Hygiene factor. Do we even have a good remote working policy? Do we have a good work-life policy? What about our health and mental health policies? Some basic policies, get them in place. And then your employee life cycle talent management initiatives, all about debiasing your recruitment, your development and training processes, and your advancement processes. But it's only, as I said, it's only useful to have those once you start build that inclusive culture. And then there's the external side, which is the 4th box, which is all about your products and services. Are they inclusive? Are your partners diverse? Are your customers diverse? And if so, how diverse are they and what are you offering for them? And it's about your reputation. So those 4 areas you need to have initiatives in order to really build that inclusive organization. Now, to complicate it further, which is the bottom pink box, you need to have initiatives aimed at women, aimed at young people, aimed at older people, aimed at people from different religions. So you don't need to start with all of those. When you start, you need to focus on a few. But these are all the things you can choose from. And then you need to decide based on what your data say, what you want to achieve, which ones work for you. So some boxes there and frameworks to help you structure your work.
Thanks, Inge. That was really helpful, and actually it made me sort of reflect on where we are in our journey in Ofgem as well. Some of it was encouraging, I'd like to say, but that was really helpful sort of reflection point for me as well. So over to you, Jason, to talk about your journey in So Energy.
Lovely, thank you very much. So yeah, we can go straight on to that next slide. Perfect. There we go. So before you jump straight into it, it can be really good to kind of consider your approach to getting buy-in on an ED&I strategy. So based on that poll that we just did, I think about 51% of us, myself was one of these people, was sat between kind of stage 2, that window dressing stage that Inge just pointed out, all the way to stage 4, like understanding the strategic importance of EDI. every business is different at different stages in their journey, and how we make your case for EDI will also need to be different. And there's an evolution that you can go through. It's kind of what I call the evolution of why are we doing what we're doing. We start with that business case. This is a really traditional approach. There are tons of case studies showing the business benefits to diverse workforces, from competitive advantage, innovation, increase to the bottom line. It's a really great way to get buy-in at a senior level, as this is squarely in their crosshairs as focus points. However, ED&I does remain an agenda item when you position it this way, always on the priority list, and may very well get pushed off that priority list for other business critical requirements, and you may not necessarily get buy-in across the wider business. The second type of case we often see is that moral case. This approach very much focused on the business's social responsibility to do right by its people. This can mean that it may stay a focus regardless of the business priorities, because we should all live by our morals, but you may have to work harder to bring senior leaders on that journey. We at So Energy have gone through these two phases over the last 2 years, and we're now moving into what I call our no case strategy. This is the process of actually embedding ED&I into the wider business strategy, rather than viewing it as a separate sort of bolt-on, which I think a lot of businesses can jump towards. And though this actually does throw up a lot of challenges in terms of getting it all set up, there's some distinct advantages, right? Because we get to piggyback off kind of the other business norms, like setting objectives, reviewing our performance, and so on and so forth. So for me, when you're coming to answering why we're going to do what we're going to do and taking people on that journey, it's really important to recognize at what stage your business is at, and whether you need to start making the business case, the financial argument, the moral case, or whether you're at the point now where you can start to build it and integrate it into the wider business strategy. We can move on to the next slide. So once you've decided your approach, it can be really tempting to dive in, right? And there are some real benefits to diving straight in. Setting up your ERGs, building partnerships with third-party specialists, reviewing your policies and your processes and procedures. But every business is really, really unique, and therefore the approach required is got to be equally unique. And that's where I think we let data guide our way. I think it's important to start to understand what data we have at our disposal, what quality does that data have, and build a bit of a picture of the current state of play. What is the state of your inclusivity? Are you using engagement surveys to understand the sense of belonging that is occurring in the business? What representation of protected and unprotected characteristics do you have? And look at it by seniority or by business unit. By looking at that data from multiple angles, it can be really, really telling. For example, at So Energy, we have a really large customer operations function. It makes up a large proportion of our 400 members, and it's reasonably diverse. But by looking at the data at that macro level, it actually hides a lot of pockets of underrepresented groups in smaller but equally impactful business areas. So it's really important to view that data at many different angles as you possibly can. And if you don't feel like you've got enough data, and I think we often do, it's really important to launch into a trust campaign before you start to try and gain extra information on your colleagues. They want to know, what's the benefit to them for sharing it? How will that information be used? Who's going to be able to see that information, and how could it impact them? Right, so take them on that bit of a trust campaign before you ask for more of that data. And next slide. Breaking it down. So it could be overwhelming though, right? I think Inge's last slide was really, really a good representation of that. There was so much that you could do. Once you've got all that data, you'll have a long list of things vying for your attention. It can be incredibly overwhelming, and especially if you're in an SME business where you may have a second role in the business, you may not have a full team at your disposal. It can start to feel like a bit of an unscalable wall. At So Energy, what we found worked really, really well was to focus our efforts, really laser focus our efforts in one particular area for at least 1 quarter, and apply the framework that I have on the right hand side there. So for example, so in this framework, you want to look at something you could do within 3 minutes, 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months for everyone in the business, for your managers, and for the leaders. So if we kind of think of it as an example for neurodivergence, for example, the 3 minutes focus for everyone was to agree to offer different ways of communicating as part of our email signature. Our 3-day initiative was to pull together an informational newsletter to help educate people on neurodivergence. Our 3-week initiative was to create neurodivergent badges that people could display on their profiles to help others recognize that they may want to communicate in a different way. And our 3-month initiative was to build a suite of systems that could support neurodivergent energists. And we went through this sort of et cetera, with our managers and our leaders. This allowed us to move the needle pretty quickly in certain areas because of that kind of focus point. And then next slide. We have the checklist. I think it's worth thinking of 4 key things when you're moving forwards with these initiatives and building in that business case. The first is to pick your approach. Every company is unique. Make sure that you're applying the right type of case to the right business. The second is EDI is everyone's job. Whenever you can, with all of these initiatives, embed accountability at every level. Especially if you're in a small to medium-sized business like myself, where I lead our talent acquisition function as well as lead on our ED&I strategy. I want everybody to play a part in driving the initiatives forwards. Personalize your approach. Right, there's no perfect template for success. The work Inge is doing is absolutely fantastic. The work you're going to hear from Lesley about is absolutely fantastic, but the way it applies to your business might be incredibly different. So it's worth picking, not for sort of copy and pasting a perfect template, but understanding what works best for your business. And measure the data before, during, and after. Don't be deterred by slow progress. I think there's an interesting balance to find. That is, we don't want to be complacent, but we also have to appreciate this is behavioral change in a lot of ways, and that is not a fast-moving piece of work. So don't be deterred if you're only seeing small percentage increases. It's about marginal gains. And that's a little bit from me.
Thanks, Jason. And you're really echoing what I'm going to say later about the power of 3. And I think in the chat as well, that's been acknowledged. It's a nice, I'm all for simplicity. So that was really good to hear from an SME context. So what are we doing in Ofgem? So I've been in post now a year. When I came to Ofgem, they had a head of D&I who'd left. But I was given a lot of pressure we need to sort this out. So I was like, right, okay, what are you trying to sort out? The positive thing was I didn't have to sell a business case from a monetary point of view. We're part of the public sector and the civil service. So actually, if we don't get the business case, then, we're struggling. The organisation understood the moral case. Actually, it wasn't just the senior managers. There were people bashing on my door to come and meet me and talk about all the wonderful things that they were doing to help support colleagues on various things, and were really itching to get involved in more strategic stuff. And obviously there is that legislative case. So, we're covered by the Equalities Act. So it's not just moral, it's about that reputational damage that you can do to your organisation if you're not treating people fairly and equitably, particularly being a public sector body. We had that top level commitment. Within my first week, I'm talking to the chair of the board and our chief exec about how much this means to them, which is really refreshing, because I have been in organisations where you've had to bash that door down. So, that you think, oh, great, I'm starting from a brilliant place here in my new role. We also had a massive amount of engagement within our own. We had well-established staff network groups that were really, really active and doing some really good practical things to try and sort of change the culture. I think where we didn't have, where our gaps were really, is having some dedicated resource to get things off the ground. So what I found when I came into the organisation, we had a strategy. It was developed in 2019. It was fine. Actually, some of the key priorities were still fit for purpose. So I wasn't starting from a blank piece of paper, but it had been developed by volunteers across the business. And it wasn't necessarily driven by data and priorities, because we had a gap there in the organisation in terms of collating and really looking at what our workforce looks like, and all of our processes. So what we really needed to do is I had to balance that sort of need from senior execs to, they wanted to see some quick wins and some real change. They were frustrated by the lack of progress, but actually I had to take them back a step or two in their journey, because as Inge's framework shows, we were still really much in a let's fix it, and they thought they were in a later stage than they were. So actually what I've had to do is sort of really have a look at the strategy, work with our staff network groups, start looking at our data. So I've got a fantastic data analyst on my team that built us a great dashboard, and that we could take that then to the board and our senior execs and say, okay, we still need to do these things in our previous strategy, but the world has changed. And there's a massive thing around context here as well. When Ofgem had drafted their strategic plan, it was pre-pandemic. We hadn't been in the midst of an energy crisis that was unprecedented in our lifetime. And the organisation was going through a complete organisational restructure, which obviously, you know, has an impact on the culture. So these three things were on their, each one on their own is massively impactful in terms of your, you know, building an inclusive culture. All three at once in the space of a couple of years was going to sort of set the organisation back. So really, we wanted to take a few steps back, look at what the data was telling us in terms of the priorities, and refresh the strategy. I want EDI to be embedded in the organisation. I think Jason and Inge have both said that this can't be, you know, a team over here doing EDI, because that's not how you embed it into a culture. But we did need some resource to get some of the practical things done and get that momentum so that we could tackle some of the cultural issues. So we did go back to basics on that. Next slide, please. So again, repeating what Jason said, the power of data. So we basically we knew what our workforce looked like. We had HR data, but we started to look at things like our recruitment, how people go through the recruitment process, started to look at our leavers data, who was leaving and why. Basically, we had any data we could get our hands on, we streamlined and brought into that dashboard so that the organisation could see clearly what our gaps were. And actually what it told us is that at senior levels we were doing quite well on gender. There'd been lots of initiatives. We were almost at a 50-50 split in terms of our top level execs, in terms of women and men, but actually we were woefully short on representation from people with a disability or those from an ethnic minority. So that made it clear to us in that new strategy that needed to be our focus, that actually what was stopping, is it our recruitment system that's stopping people coming in, or are we recruiting and actually they're just not coming through the career progression system? So that's really, and we still haven't answered that, by the way. That's just, you know, where we got to with that. And if you can go on to the next slide. Again, the power of three, keep things simple. We really wanted to reframe the strategy. The strategy was a lot of good intentions and a lot of good initiatives, and a lot of them still fit under these pillars. But actually, when you communicate into the business what direction of travel you want to go on with your EDI journey, then keeping it simple really helps embed it. So we had the first one was about diverse and inclusive workforce. So that is getting our processes, getting the basics right, as Inge alluded to, but also what we're going to do in terms of our, you know, career progression, our performance management, making sure that we're maintaining that talent and we're not losing it. The second point is about that inclusive culture, and that's where we're sort of focusing quite a lot of effort now, is that inclusive leadership piece, making sure those courageous conversations happen, particularly when an organisation is under pressure you know, in terms of we've been the busiest we've ever been as an organisation managing an energy crisis, having to deal with a backlash from the media, which obviously has an impact on our people, trying to do that, create that fostering and supportive environment that people can flourish. And then our third role as the regulator, and obviously as my role on the Tide task force, is about how we promote D&I more externally and try and promote it within the wider energy sector. So one of the reasons why I'm here today. So that's been our journey, very much still on a journey, I would say, but certainly some of the frameworks and the insight that both Jason and Inge have given have certainly applied to our case study. Okay, I think it's back to you now, Inge.
Yeah, thank you, Lesley, and thank you, Jason. That was so great to hear your two stories, right, and where you started, and what I recognised in Jason's story about So Energy, being really honest where you are, right, saying actually we don't understand the opportunity yet and how it helps. We're trying to understand that. We made all the business cases, but it didn't really get people on board. And only when we said, actually, this is part of our business, this is an opportunity to grow, that's when we started seeing it, rather than having the separate case. You know, it needs to be, and that is, yeah, it needs to become, I think it's about business leaders really realizing this is part of your DNA, that if you actually don't include everyone, you're not going to be creative. You're not going to be able to innovate quickly enough with the current market. So you're going to hit your targets. You've got to be inclusive of everyone, and you need every single person. And yeah, so I like that sort of that no case step, and also recognizing that that's where you start, rather than by getting the data. The data comes next, right? You first get the people on board, and then you sort of say, well, let's dig a bit deeper. Where do we want to go? What data do we need to do that? And then in Lesley's approach, what struck me there was also that honesty, same thing. It was honestly saying our leaders were talking about it. I thought, oh yeah, stage 4 or 5, you know, they're really getting it. But Lesley then realizing they're talking about it, but they don't quite get that it's something they need to do and they need to start working on. So to really get that understanding is where she started. And also then, yeah, looking at, well, where are we going to focus? Well, let's look what we have and what we don't have, and then identify the gap of where we need to start first. So Jason said, yeah, just start every 3 months, focus on something else. So you start building everything, which is a great approach as well. A good way to sort of decide, well, what is then the first 3 months, is to also then look at, well, where is the biggest gap? Where is the thing we and not just the biggest gap, rather than randomly saying, oh yeah, neurodiversity is our gap, because we just don't have any information on it, to say, well, but what do we want to achieve? What is most important for us to make use of this brilliant opportunity? And then say, well, then that's the area we need to start in.
Thanks, Inge. I think we're going to go to questions in a moment, but and then follow up with a sort of poll on how people have found this session. So it will be quick. We will be sending out feedback forms as well, but this is just to give us a sort of instant snapshot on how useful this session is. And, you know, again, honest feedback's really helpful. This is the first one we've run in this series. So hopefully throughout the course of the series of webinars, we can make sure that we're tailoring them to what people need. So I think we've had one already in the chat, which I'm happy to sort of start on, and that's from Harriet, asking whether we use external companies to get the data, and how often we engage with employees to read the room on EDI and how they are feeling and their lived experience. So that's a great question, thank you. We're lucky in Ofgem, we have existing HR systems where we collect people's personal data. Again, that's only as good as the self-declarations. So again, to Jason's point about building that trust, doing some myth busting about what's in it for them if they give their information, and that reassurance about confidentiality is really important. On the lived experience, we run an annual engagement survey, which covers, it's quite a lengthy one. It's one that's designed by the civil service to allow us to benchmark against other organisations within the civil service. So it's quite useful for us, but there's a big section on there about fairness and inclusion, but there's also other measures that allude to inclusion as well. So that really gives us a baseline and an annual checkpoint in which we can, we've got that qualitative data that tells us something. But using our employee our staff network groups or resource groups, whatever they're called, they're really a good conduit, because they are the voice of the people. So you soon hear if something's going wrong in an organisation, because if you've got really effective ones. I don't know whether Jason or Inge, you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Actually, so we have affinity groups, is what we call it, can be really, really useful tools for hearing what's going on. Also, don't be scared of not looking at large sets of data, but actually getting to know your people. Things like stay interviews is a really, really useful one. And we also did one last year where we run an internal job fair. We allowed people to kind of come in and just explore the different careers that were inside our business. We were able to collect some information on that, so where people aspired to be, and then cross-sectionalize that data with the diversity and inclusion data to start to see if there were some patterns emerging, perhaps blockers that people were interpreting as, so, was there a certain type of characteristic that just wasn't applying for roles in engineering? And then we could start doing focus groups and stay interviews and start to speak to those people to understand from their perspective what blockers they were seeing. It's all about getting to know your people, right? And data on a high level is really, really great, but also don't be scared of getting in the weeds and having a chat to people, because that can be just as powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I take the next question, Lesley.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, Abby asking, is there advice and support to help understand the best ways of gathering data and setting targets? In principle, there is the type of thing, you can go online and find some. There are apps and tools, but what I recommend organizations is to make sure it fits with what you normally do. So if you're in a large accounting firm, you want lots of data because that's what works. Some of the larger energy companies we work with have actually very little data. They just have an annual inclusion survey because they're at the start and they don't really need to measure everything. They just need to measure the one thing where they're actually moving forward with now. And the same with setting targets. One of the big like if you normally work with KPIs and all managers have KPIs, that's where you want to head towards. Don't start with KPIs year one. Year one, make a very achievable target that give sort of, I know Vodafone said +1. So they wanted in every unit, they wanted one more senior female leader. That was year one. So make it very achievable so you get people to come with you. Then year 3, you start putting in KPIs, and yeah, obviously maybe you are in year 2 already, but be careful when you start putting in KPIs, you need to have your buy-in already, and you need to have the tools to measure those KPIs, and people need to have the tools to be able to achieve those KPIs. That said, if your organization doesn't function, if there's no KPIs, maybe that's where you need to start, so, and maybe you don't even have KPIs, you just have an overall target. And yeah, there is accountability in another way. So I would say fit it to what works for your organization and what works for your senior team. What is going to help them move forward rather than look at all kinds of external things.
Great, thanks, Inge. We've had a really interesting one around the diversity of thought, and this is something I'm sort of grappling with, not grappling, but encouraging, shall we say, around the table. It can be tough for leaders, and about how to disagree well, and the spirit of avoiding groupthink. Well, in terms of what I've done, I've just done a session with one of our directorates at their away day. And there's some simple things that you can do in terms of challenging people to have a look at how their own circle of trust. Is their circle of trust diverse? And there's some really good affinity bias exercises out there that are just really simple to run, to just see whether, if your own circle is not diverse, then how do you make your thoughts more diverse? And that can be by spending time with people that are not like you. Or one thing I do, I'm a massive extrovert, so I like to seek out people that are more reflective and are more considered, shall we say, than don't just launch into things, just because I find I have better outcomes if I've got someone challenging me, if I've got a mad and crazy scheme that they, you know, hang on, have you thought about the logistics of this and about how it's going to land? So that's something that I do on a personal basis. But yeah, it's quite a tricky one, because I think that's where your inclusive values come in, and have, you know, creating that culture of courageous conversations but in a safe environment. And it, you know, I think as long as someone is coming from a place of good intentions, then that's where your awareness can help. And we've run a few sessions, our network groups, on some really quite tricky subjects around race and sexual orientation and gender identity, but it's allowed those conversations to be the norm. I'm not saying we've got it right yet, we're very, very much on a journey, but I don't know if anybody else has got any insights. Obviously, Jason, there was the work you said you've done on neurodiversity, which is probably topical.
Yeah, so I think interestingly, and I'm conscious of not sounding like a broken record here about it, and it just being ED&I being part of your business strategy. But a lot of businesses either will do or will plan on having behavioural frameworks in place at some point during their tenure, and making sure that the role of ED&I plays a part in the development of that behavioural framework can certainly help. And you've got some clear guidelines as to how people should approach new ideas. And one quick win that I found has been useful in meetings of my own team is making sure that the right people speak first. So let the most junior person in the room speak first, or select a random order each time in a meeting for who's going to speak up first, who's going to bring the ideas to the table first, so that it's not the leader or the manager of that same outspoken individual continually driving the agenda one way or another. It'd be a really quick way of getting some sort of buy-in there. But no, primarily for me, it's if your business has a behavioral framework, review it, look at whether it has ED&I woven into it, right? Does it have a culture of inclusive belonging? Because we have to take a conscious effort, right? So conscious inclusion is absolutely key, and that behavioral framework's there to create kind of that conscious effort.
Thanks, Jason. That really chimes with me. Inge, did you have any insights? Or I'm conscious of time, and there's
I have loads, but let's go to the next question as well, because make sure we
yeah. So Adam said, as an industry, we all face similar challenges. What do you think we could best collaborate on to act collectively, other than best practice sharing for our own business, e.g. a campaign to attract people to the sector? And just to follow on from that, the next Tide webinar will be also focused on data collection and targets for those that are interested. Just get a quick plug in there. And there's a similar question on how to increase diversity within industry working groups, specifically ones that have a strict entry criteria. So
I don't mind taking the first part about some of the other things that we could do as an industry. We've got gaps, right? You know, no one's absolutely nailed it yet. And one of the things I'm really interested about the work we're doing at Tide is kind of where we're going to see some of those common gaps that might exist across our industry, and how we plug those. I'm a big believer. Things like hackathons are really, really powerful, right? You bring a group of individuals across the industry together, you put them laser focused on a particular challenge, and you get them to compete for the best kind of toolkit that they can develop to solve that problem. And I think we could do more as an industry to run events like that. And I'm hoping at Tide on the best practice group, we certainly plan on doing that when we find that we don't have enough submissions of best practice in any particular focus area.
Inge, have you seen something in other sectors that has worked well?
Yeah, best practice guides, but also a series of webinars, which is what you're doing, what I've seen well is a whole skills database, so you can really see where diverse people are in the country, so much more data based on diversity. And what also is quite effective is to actually have best practice groups, so groups of senior leaders who like come together once every 2 months to share how do you do this inclusion thing in your organization, a group of HR and D&I people sharing what they are learning, what they're implementing. So very much practical learning groups rather than a webinar someone sending on. It's useful, but then next to that there's the practical learning groups.
And I think there's a few people that are on the Tide Task Force that have put some books and some nods to marketing campaigns, particularly on the Powerful Women, the energy. There's a nod to the Energy Leader Coalition, so have a look at those links as well. I think there's some really useful stuff coming on this. I'm conscious I want to give a plug for the LinkedIn and the conference, but one last question from Catherine about how do you encourage your senior leaders to explain the importance of how work was completed. They've given a case study where that things had to be done in tandem with EDI, with safeguarding for mental health. So so making sure that EDI isn't a tick box, it's actually living and breathing across everything that we do. Does anyone want to pick that one up before we go to the poll? I think the behavioural framework you mentioned, Jason, probably alludes to that, and certainly in Ofgem we've got a set of values. They're not rocket science, but it's about how we hold our leaders accountable to them and call out any behaviours that are not in line. And I think some of those frameworks you've given, Inge, show how you can embed it into all the systems and processes as well. Okay, I'm conscious we've got a minute left, so we're going to run the final poll. And that's really just a quick snapshot on how confident you were about building an EDI strategy before the session. And then it'll be about whether you've found this session useful and whether it's increased your confidence level. While people are doing that, I'm just going to give a shameless plug for the save the date for the 29th of June. That's the EDI conference that's run by the founding members of Tide. They're really good events. I'm not just saying that because I'm in one of the founding organisations. We have some really good quality speakers, so there will be an official save the date coming soon. There's also, what I will put in the chat is links to the Tide LinkedIn page, which has all of our events that we will be planning and information about what we're doing as a task force. But also there is also an industry calendar of events that people can add to if they email diversity@energyuk.org.uk. So we have themed days. So we're very much about sharing those things that go in across industry to maximise impact. So there's some links in the page. And let's see what the poll's telling us.
Yeah, and I think, Lesley, I was looking at that question of recruitment and recruiting diverse people into the sector. That may be another webinar topic because there's so much to say on that. That would be something I think to take forward.
And I think it's a problem shared as well. We're all trying to grapple with the same issues. We're all fishing in the same talent pools. So what we can do together as a sector is always going to be better. So, oh, we've seen a shift. So thank you for giving that feedback. There will be a feedback sheet where you can give some more in-depth commentary on the content and the format of today. But thank you all. Firstly, thank you to Inge and Jason for your contributions and your time. And thank you to everyone that's dialed in and for the great questions. See you all soon and hopefully at the next Tide webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.